there's probably a pretty good chance that most of you fall in between a size range. And by that, I mean between a small and a medium, between a medium and a large. I personally am a medium, and this really makes bike purchasing really complicated because you definitely don't want to buy the wrong size bike because you've spent all this money, there's a bike shortage. What are you going to do? In this video, I'm going to share with you some things I've learned being in between sizes to help you guys make a better bike purchasing decision. Okay, behind me, I've got two bicycles. I have a Crest Bambora in size small and a Bear Claw Thunderhawk in their size 52.5, which would be the equivalent of a Crest Bambora in size medium. I brought these two bikes out because it'll give you a good sense of what to expect if you size down as opposed to sizing up. One of the big challenges of sizing is body proportions. Not everybody's bodies are proportioned the same way. So for example, I'm 5'8", which is a pretty average height for a male in the United States. However, my inseam length is 29 inches. So that means I have the legs of a much shorter person. One of the old rules of thumb of bike sizing is standover height. So you know what that is. You prop the bike up, you throw a leg over, and you make sure that you can lift the bike up and there's some clearance. And that works if you have normal height to leg ratio, but I do not. So even on the size small, I don't have the recommended standover clearance. And this has been kind of the bane of my bike riding experience. I've tended to put more weight over standover clearance, and because of that, I tend to size down when I'm stuck in between two frames, which is pretty much all the time. The downside, however, of doing this is you do end up with a lot more spacers under your stem. I mean, personally, this doesn't bother me a whole lot, but for some it might, and some people just feel compelled to point out the number of spacers below your stem. So that's why recently, when I purchased the Bear Claw Thunderhawk, I bought a size up, a 52.5. which when you compare it on Bike Insights is pretty close to the medium-sized Bambora. The end result of that is that I'm running fewer spacers. I think the bike generally looks a little bit more balanced. The downside, however, is again, because of my short legs to my height ratio, I have like zero standover. In fact, this is kind of gently prodding me upwards when I straddle the bike. So you can see it's a balancing act between standover height and enough stack so you're not running like a ton of spacers, and reach so you're not running a super stubby stem. So reach is this horizontal measurement, and although it's fixed, you do have a fair amount of flexibility in increasing or decreasing the reach. And by that I mean, you know, stem length, your handlebars add reach, as well as the brake hoods. So while reach is fixed, it's actually pretty flexible. Stack height, however, the measurement that kind of determines how high you can get your handlebars without putting a ton of spacers below it, is kind of harder to fudge with. First off, if you've got a bike with a carbon steer tube, you probably only want to take it so high before it gets too dangerous, too much excessive force that might break the steer tube. You have a little bit more latitude with height with an alloy steer tube. If you really want to get your handlebars high, I'd definitely look for a fork with an alloy steer tube, not a carbon one. So back to stack and reach in terms of frame size. So here I'm looking at the Crest Bambora in size small and medium, and just isolating stack and reach. And what's interesting is that between the two sizes, even though you went up a full size, that reach number only increased by 4 millimeters, but the stack increased by 23 millimeters. So what that tells me is that if you like to have your handlebars in a fairly upright position, it might be worthwhile considering sizing up. Again, in that example, you gain over 20 mil of stack. You can run less spacers. The bike's going to look a little bit better proportioned. You will have to kind of negotiate that standover height issue, however. So let's look at the geocharts for the Bambora and the Bear Claw. As you can see, the reach difference between the small Bambora and the 52.5 Bear Claw, again, increased by just the tiniest bit at 3.4 millimeters. The stack, however, increased to 17 millimeters, so almost 20 mil. And you can kind of see how that plays out in the build. Fewer spacers in the front, slightly less seat posts showing in the rear. Like I mentioned earlier, however, I have no standover room on the Bear Claw, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. And this is why. So for me, I'm going to treat the Bear Claw mostly as a all-road bike. So I'm going to be riding paved roads, gravel roads, and because it is an all-road bike, I think standover is less of an issue. Unlike, would say, a mountain bike or a drop bar mountain bike, where I'm going to be taking it on more single track, more technical terrain, where I may have to put a foot down really quickly, that's when I would want more standover height. However, since it's mostly going to be like a road bike, for the vast majority of time, I probably won't be dabbing my foot or having to put a foot down very quickly. That's a compromise I made with this bike, and I'm completely okay with it. If you're going to be riding a bike on generally non-technical terrain and won't have to do super quick dismounts, then sizing up might be okay. This is the size medium of the Tumbleweed Stargazer, and there's a couple things going on here. First, you can see here I have fewer spacers than I have on the Bear Claw, and that is because this bike has a lot of stack to it. So that means it makes it really easy to get the handlebars nice and high if that's what you want. One way you can mitigate this whole standover issue thing, if you're going on technical terrain with a bike that is slightly larger, is if you look for a bike with a sloping top tube. This would buy you some of that standover clearance that you don't get with a horizontal top tube bike. So while I'm pulling random bikes out of the garage, I'm going to talk about one more thing, which I'm sure someone will ask, is what do you do if you're going to be using an alt bar that sweeps back? If you look at a drop bar bike, clearly you've got a stem moving forward, and then a handlebar that pushes you forward still, and then your shifters. With a flat bar bike or an alt bar bike, you can see that the handlebars are going to be working to move you backwards. And to counteract this, typically you'll have to run a really long stem. So this is 120, and you might also have to raise the bars a fair bit to get it comfortable. What does all this mean in the size discussion? If you're stuck between two sizes and you're going to run a swept back bar, definitely choose the larger size. This will help with the reach a little bit, but definitely the stack height. So to summarize, if you're in between sizes, and if you value standover height over anything else, then size down. However, if you know that you're going to want to raise your handlebars, fairly level with the saddle, if not a little bit taller, then consider sizing up. You'll run fewer spacers. Granted, you'll lose that standover height, but in the long run, it'll make it easier to get the bars up. If you're going to be doing lots of technical riding where you have to get off really quickly, then maybe not a good idea. Look for a bike with a sloping top tube. Or if you're like me and you know that bike is going to be used mostly on road, and you've made the piece of sacrificing standover height for a better stack number, then size up. Hopefully this video was helpful and not too confusing. Let me know your experiences if you're caught between sizes. Do you size up or do you size down? Who else is this medium? Put medium in the comments. I'd love to know. If you like this content, consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. That is the best way. It gives us a budget so we can make 2 videos every single week like clockwork. Plus you also get some awesome perks from lots of brands that we work with. As always, everybody, keep the supple side down.